And on to our first panel of this afternoon, which is the FreeNow panel, which is going to discuss super apps as drivers for urban change. So, can we welcome to the stage from FreeNow, David Correll, from DOT, Duncan Robertson, and our moderator for this panel from Polis Network should be Susan Hoadley.
So it's good afternoon from my side and welcome to this session on mobility super apps. So if you didn't know what a mobility super app is, you will know by the end of the session. So just a few words about myself. So Suzanne Hoadley from Polis. I guess many of you don't know what Polis is. It's a network of local authorities and transport authorities. So we're based in Brussels. We have just over 100 members from across Europe. So from the UK, we work with, for instance, Transport for London, the boroughs, Transport for Greater Manchester, Glasgow City Council, but also smaller local authorities like Southend. And we also have associate members, which are like charities or knowledge platforms, not-for-profit bodies like Sustrans. So we work quite a lot with Sustrans. And so our role at Polis is really to engage with our members about new transport concepts, new developments. That could be technology like automation, apps, it could be services and new business models. And when, as regards automation, we've been working on this topic for about 10 or 12 years in various research projects. I noted on the previous slide that Easy Mile was one of the founding members of Pave Europe. This was actually a company that emerged from one of my first European research projects. It was actually a large-scale demonstration project of automated shuttles. And this company actually emerged in the course of this project. And so we've been engaging with our members for many years on various topics. So automation is one of them, but also mobility as a service, which is perhaps more relevant to this session today. And I guess I can identify with many of the comments that have been made, the points that have been made during the course of the day, especially this morning. And we actually published some papers, discussion papers we call them. In 2017, there was a paper on mass, and 2018 on automated vehicles, where we set out what are the views of local authorities across Europe, amongst our membership, on these new developments, what concerns they have, where they see benefit, but also where they see disbenefit. So our two panelists, that's enough about me. That was already a long introduction, sorry about that, but I thought it was important to say that. So we have two panelists today. To my right, we have Duncan Robertson, who is the UK General Manager of DOT, so the e-scooter company. And e-bike, sorry. And you can say a bit more about DOT afterwards. And next to Duncan is David Correll, I don't know how you pronounce it, who is the Director of New Mobility Partnerships at FreeNow, so the sponsor of this session. And I must confess, until I spoke to David last week, I had assumed that FreeNow was a ride-hailing company, and that's it, but it's actually a mobility integrator now. And I think that's why we have David here today. So the first question then is to David, what is a mobility super app and how is it going to help local authorities achieve their transport goals? How is it going to help, reduce congestion and get this modal shift?
Okay, hi everyone. I'm going to try to explain that shortly. A mobility super app, as the name states, it's an app, so one app. One registration process, one validation of driving license, one user experience as well, but an app that you can use in 10 countries, an app that gives you access to, at the moment on the FreeNow app, more than 220,000 vehicles that you can book anytime, anywhere, and that gives you access to e-bikes, e-scooters, car sharing, e-mopeds on top of ride-hailing. And I'm sorry, actually, that shows us we still have a long way to go, to create that awareness that you can find all these assets. in a FreeNow app, actually, that we're not a ride-hailing company, but we're really like a mobility super app. That's what we're targeting to be. Obviously, to become that, we're also interested in public transport, which is the pillar of the mobility in many cities. And all the new, let's say, transportation modes that have been discussed so far. So AVs are of the highest interest for us and for our 56 million users in Europe. You know, like, we want to give them access to everything that helps them moving in the city. And the more sustainable the solution they choose, the better for the city. And that's where we're actually helping the cities to achieve their goals as well.
Okay, thank you. And for you, Duncan, so what is DOT going to be? Is it a super app today? Does it have ambitions to be one in the future? What's your take on this?
So at the moment, we don't really have an ambition to become a super app. We work with partners like FreeNow, and that's we use them as effectively a platform for people to be able to access our services either through our own app or through an aggregator who can, help with this, joining journeys up, making sure that people can do, a little bit on a train, a little bit on a bus, and maybe a bit on a scooter or a bicycle, which is our kind of stock in trade. We're operators. DOT's an operator of scooters and bikes. We don't have and we don't necessarily want to have the expertise to be able to extend into, multimodal. We like to be a little bit multimodal, but maybe not entirely multimodal, which is where we integrate. And this is where it, being able to have services like FreeNow that can bring all these together are really going to kind of start moving the needle when it comes to people being able to do the trips that they want to do and getting truly from A to B in a very coordinated way.
Okay, so if I've understood then, so FreeNow, you don't own any vehicles, so you're about integrating operators like DOT, but also e-bike providers and potentially in the future fleets of automated vehicles.
Exactly. Like, we work with operators like DOT, but we also have like partnerships with Sixt as a car sharer, with ShareNow, with Miles in Germany. Like, here we're also working with Tier, which is a scooter and e-bike provider. We're working with a Human Forest in London that we launched recently, like e-bike provider. We're working with all the best operators like we find in each one of the cities, because they have the know-how and the knowledge on how to operate these type of services. And so I think that's a good combination actually to work with the best operators in each one of the cities.
You mentioned public transport before, so you want to work with public transport operators, and how's that going?
That's still work in progress. In the coming weeks, actually, we have some nice announcements to do, but communication department would kill me if I do it today, so you have to be a bit patient. But that's definitely one of the key topics. As mentioned, you can't talk about mobility in a city if you don't work with public transport, because that's the main pillar to move people inside the city. So definitely that's our top priority, to give access to our user base to public transport as well.
Okay, well, we can, I think, pick up on that later on. But now moving to Duncan then. So, I mean, you're a company of e-scooters and e-bikes as well, as you pointed out. So, I mean, how does that, we're in a meeting about automation. And apparently you feel that there are some learnings from your experience of rolling out these sort of shared mobility services, things that we could learn from for the future of shared fleets of automated vehicles.
Yeah, I think that anyone interested in, and you guys obviously all are, in a future of autonomy, particularly with road vehicles, needs to be looking at the bike and scooter share industry now. We are in many ways tackling some of the problems which you will have when the time comes to roll out at scale. For example, obviously we're in London now, and this is a slightly unusual circumstance, but it's not uncommon for the regulatory environment in London to be seen in other cities. But essentially with our bikes, there is no coordination. So we launch in boroughs. There's 33 of them when we are given permission to operate in those boroughs, which means that you can ride a bike up to the edge of Westminster, for example, and then you have to stop, and the geofence stops you, and the vehicle will no longer go any further because we don't yet have permission to operate in Camden. Now, what that looks like in real terms is, maybe I use the City of London and Camden as a good example. One side of the road at Holborn is Camden. The south side of the road is City of London. So, it's not even as if it's a whole street. You can just be stopped at half a street. And I think if we're not able to solve that with these small-scale vehicles like scooters and bikes, then we're going to have a big problem in the future. So this is where the work that we're doing now around influencing regulators, trying to pull things together in a much more coordinated way, is where we're laying. I would argue that we're laying the kind of groundworks for things to come. So yeah, I think there's an awful lot for us to be able to contribute towards. The other thing I forgot to mention is that one of the critical things that we're dealing with in the scooter and bike share industry at the moment is the number of operators. So that's another consideration that needs to happen. Like who's going to come along when we're trying to automate more? Are there going to be, in some European cities, there were 10 scooter operators? It's ludicrous. It doesn't work. So who controls that? Who manages that? Who gets selected? Is there a selection process? Is it based on the number of vehicles, or based on the number of operators? There's lots of questions that we're dealing with right now that I think will be very useful for the future.
Yeah, I think the point you made about being restricted to certain boroughs, I mean, I've certainly seen this in other cities in Europe when it comes to the rollout of bike sharing schemes. For instance, I think in Brussels many years ago, that was the Brussels region has a similar setup to London, in that you have the regional authority, but then you have the individual districts. I think we have around 20. And the bike sharing scheme could only operate in certain boroughs. So, you can't expect a user to start and end a journey within a borough, within administrative boundaries. So I think certainly there is a lot we can learn for automation. I think, as I said, I've been working in the automation domain for many years, so I'm familiar with the operational design domain. And if we want to offer a good service to users, in a fully automated vehicle, a shared vehicle, robo-taxi, if you like, they should be able to go from anywhere to anywhere. So if we only have a part of the city or one road that is able to allow or to accept a fully automated vehicle, or a level 4 vehicle even, I mean, we're just not going to be offering a credible service to users. So how are you getting around this problem in London? Is it sorted, or is it still work in progress?
It's still work in progress. So we made, there was a big step made when it came to the scooters that have been rolled out since early last year, or mid last year. And what that significant step was, that Transport for London jumped in and played the coordinator role. So they sat in the middle, which we kind of expected them to do for bikes in the past, but they've done this for scooters. So it's not 100%, but they managed to get 10 local authorities, all connected, to join into the scheme. So that means that you do have, as I say, it's not perfect, because there are areas where you can't go still, but the area that you can go is entirely contiguous. So everyone can go wherever they want within that zone. So that's kind of what we're trying to push, and that's what we're getting closer and closer to. And new legislation that's coming out soon that will legalize scooters will also apply to bicycles, and it will give local authorities more powers when it comes to bikes, which means that we potentially, very soon, are in a position where we can have that coordination from TfL to operate across all of the areas. And then it will be a single procurement, and then you have a small handful of operators who are responsible for providing a service across the whole of London. And that will just free up so many journeys, so many trips, and really start to make these kind of modes, coupled with being involved in FreeNow and other aggregators, just this real, as I said before, this real end-to-end transport process. So yeah, we're slowly but surely pushing things along, and I hope that when we come to fully autonomous vehicles in London, we'll have done what we need to do to at least have precedent or a framework to be able to operate in the future.
Okay, thanks. And what about for some of the services that you operate, notably ride-hailing? I mean, have you encountered similar sort of problems?
I mean, we have the exact same problems. I think the main learnings from the current services which are operated is basically several iterations are needed to find the right solution. Again, like maybe to keep on talking about the scooter industry, because I think like the analogy is quite nice. Let's think about like how it was 3 years ago, like when the operators started operating there. Like they launched with mostly like Segway ES4 that you could buy as a person like on Amazon or eBay. And like in 3 years, like there's so much progress that was done on the hardware that are now able like to park in a delimited zone, that are able to manage like no-go zones and slow speed zones. Like so much progress has been done by the industry in only 3 years, like on the hardware, on the software, and also on the regulation. Again, like let's look at 3 years back. I think like there was like one study showing there were about like 70,000 scooters in Paris, and that was a mess. And like everyone made progress, including the regulator, and now like you have like 3 operators operating like 15,000 assets in a much cleaner way. So I think the main learning is for the AVs, like what's ahead of you is like several iterations, and all the actors have to be ready for that. Like you have to accept that the first big scale project that will be launched will not be the final solution, and there will be several evolutions there, like before we find the right setup.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from both of you is that public authorities, well, they have to coordinate, especially when you have multiple public authorities operating within, say, a functional urban area, within a city region. And there has to be, a policy framework, but there has to be regulation as well. So this is what I'm getting from you, which contrasts quite a lot to the beginning of, let's say, the e-scooter sector 3-4 years ago. I remember many an event I went to and conversations I had with e-scooter companies and other types of new mobility providers that they didn't want regulation, they wanted free and unfettered access to cities, and that they could bring a solution to all the congestion problems in cities. So I think the narrative has changed quite a lot, now, today.
Very, very much so. I mean, we at DOT have always been kind of promoting regulation as the way to do it. We typically only launch in protected markets, i.e. markets that are controlled by some kind of procurement process through the local authority. Because it's just, I'm not saying that we certainly don't support single operator, but a few operators that have been selected as opposed to a complete free-for-all, because the free-for-all just simply doesn't work. It doesn't even work for the user. It works for the users for a little while because there's a price war often, but then soon enough it starts to not work, and it's chaos on the street as well. And I think that the micro-mobility industry has, it's got a bit of a, I suppose, a checkered past in being a disruptor, because we were able to be disruptors. Prior to DOT, I worked at Mobike, and we rather unceremoniously bashed the door down of the kind of status quo. But autonomous vehicles, I don't think you're going to have that luxury if it is a luxury. So get on board with regulation right now, and it'll pay dividends in the future.
Okay, is that some view that's shared by FreeNow?
The role of public authorities is central. They influence not only the regulation framework, and I like the idea this morning that was flagged around the principles as well. I think that's a nice concept rather than regulations, but they also influence infrastructure, which is a key element to succeed with mobility. So I mean, to shape the right solution, you need all the actors to sit around the table, basically. The operators, the platforms, the regulator, the public authorities. I think one interesting concept that was brought by Duncan is the idea of mobility zone, okay? Because mobility doesn't stop at the border of your city. So that's the type of job that needs to be done, to understand how people are moving, sharing data with cities, proving them actually cutting a geofence randomly at the administrative border of your city doesn't work, because that's not how people commute and that's not how people move around the city. So that's the next challenge that the AV industry will also be facing. Like, where can I use it? What's the use case? Like, who is going to use it? Like, where are they? Like, that's the type of questions that will need to be answered.
Yeah, they're the right questions. In the paper that Polis published in 2018, which was a collection of views and questions by our members about automated vehicles, I think one of the recommendations that came out was that local authorities need to have the right powers or the competence really to be able to to regulate, I guess, these fleets of robo-taxis that we will see 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time. We simply don't know. I mean, there's so much uncertainty there. And I think maybe that's where the UK differs to mainland Europe, most other countries, in that on the continent, what a lot of our members are saying is that while they can issue licenses for regular taxis, they don't have the competence for private hire vehicles, so that includes ride-hailing vehicles, minicabs, I guess, and that's a big problem. That's a big problem today because it means that this tends to be a competence of the national level. So they don't know how many licenses are being issued to private hire vehicles, and they simply don't know how many of these private hire vehicles are actually operating in their city. They know there's a lot because they see the increased traffic, and this is something that will have to be sorted out. I mean, we've had many discussions with representatives of city authorities, and they're looking. How can we address this? Because often what happens is that licenses that are even, so for instance in Belgium, where I live, we have a federal structure, we have 3 regions, and actually taxis and private hire vehicles is a regional competence. But what we tend to see is that those licenses that are issued in the southern region where I live, the French-speaking part Wallonia, and in the northern region in Flanders, a lot of those drivers actually come to Brussels because that's where the demand is, that's where the customers are. So that means that Brussels is flooded with taxis and private hire vehicles. So I think this is certainly something that, it's all about giving public authorities the means and the tools to be able to manage the arrival of these automated vehicles and these fleets.
I think that's where we can help them because like all the data, like you mentioned, like as a platform, we have them. We know like where people order a PHV, where they want to end their ride. We know like if they use only like one mode, several modes. We know like pretty much like everything about our users. So I mean like we would be delighted like to share this type of information and to shape the right solution afterwards to derive like the number of licenses that have to be issued, because like we could shape it and estimate like what's the right number of drivers based on the demand like we are receiving. I think that's where the platforms can help.
Okay, so you'd be willing to share that data if a public authority comes to you and says, "Can I access that data?"
We do it on already,
on
like actually,
basis?
like that's when we are asked to, like what is sometimes missing is a standard, or that's the difficulty, because if each city comes with a specific request and I want the data to be presented in that's where the complexity is sitting, I believe. Like that's having like a standard framework like to exchange data would definitely help shaping the mobility landscape, and we're more than willing to support that.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's very interesting to hear, because data sharing is very topical at the moment. I'm sure, as you know, at DOT and your operations on the continent, where we know that local authorities are already demanding certain data from the e-scooter companies and the e-bike companies, because they really want to understand how people are moving around the city. And I think this is going to be crucial moving forward. We need to understand, public authorities need to know how people are moving around, to see, are these new services, that are here today, and automated fleets that will be here in 20, 30 years' time, are they helping us as local authorities to achieve our transport goals? I mean, going back to this morning's session and this target of Transport for London, 80% of all trips should be by public transport or active modes by 2041. So then coming then onto coming back to the role of the super apps then, I mean, so you are a super app, and what is the role of the public authority in these super apps? I mean, would you see a local authority, a transport authority, as being a provider of an app, or do you think this is the preserve of private, commercial players?
I think there's room for everyone. Like that's what we keep on saying to all the cities. Actually, like you can have definitely like a public mass platform that serves the commuters, but at the same time, like as mentioned, like we operate in 10 countries, and I doubt like someone commuting to London for a single day would download like the local app. But like if you know like the FreeNow app, if you are in Poland, if you are in Barcelona, if you are in Paris, and you're commuting for a day in London, you would be happy to use the same app you use every day and have access to the same services you use every day, including public transport. So I think for us, like the key is to have access to public transport. That's really like the goal should be like to give access to the highest number of people to public transport, regardless like what's the entry point. Like if it's a public mass platform, very well. If it's our mobility super app, even better for me. But like that's there's room for everyone, I believe.
Okay, so.
Yeah, from our perspective, it's we're here. We've got the APIs to feed into these things. We already do. So happy to do that. Anyone, whoever can completely crack it, be it someone like FreeNow or a local authority or a mixture of the two, then the data's there and ready to be had. The key for me is kind of threefold. It's around payment, navigation, and choice. So if you can get all of those into one place, then you've got a solution, and that is effectively mobility as a service. But we've been talking about mobility as a service for 20 years, and it hasn't really come to fruition, but we're getting very, very close. But if you could crack those three, in my view, then you've got a real service, and we're just happy to be here ready to feed into it and provide part of that service on street.
Okay, so you talked about mobility as a service and not really being there. I mean, would you say, this is a subject that I've been working a lot on in the last 6 months, because we are expecting some European legislation. Of course, it won't affect the UK, of course, but in the future related this and to access to public transport ticketing systems. So, is this something that you favour, you would like to see happening? Do you see this as being one of the main obstacles to really the creation of the...
Definitely, actually, like that's if we run a survey to our B2B users, actually asking them like, what service would you like to see like on the platform, like as a perk? And the first answer, like 70%, was public transport, because that's what people still use and still need on a daily basis. So definitely, like giving access like to as many solutions as possible to public transport ticketing is the right thing to do, definitely.
Okay, then, so we're coming to the end of our session. I have one more question for you, and that is, how do you see the market for these mobility super apps and shared and automated mobility services evolving in the coming decade?
I can start.
Go first, yeah.
Okay. I would like to give the same answer as Thomas this morning. I don't know, but that would be a bit disappointing, so maybe I'll have to elaborate a little bit on that one. And summarizing like what we discussed, I think like there will be new modes of transport that will come. So AVs will have an impact. Flying taxis at some point will also have an impact. So new modes and more collaboration. And I think like the focus at the end like will be on the user experience, because like it has to be easy for the user to find, book, and use all these services. So the company who manages to crack that will be in a good place in 10 years, I believe.
And you didn't really talk about the business model, because I learned just last week that one of the most well-known, the most established mass players in Europe, on the continent, is looking for new investors, is laying off staff, naming no names. So as you said, finding the right business model seems to be quite elusive.
It's a difficult one, because there's still like a fierce competition on the market, let's face it. And as I said, like there are several iterations to find the right business model. So talking about FreeNow, like if you look at what we're doing on the B2B side, moving in the direction of mobility budgets and targeting like companies like to stop using like fleet management services, but rather use a mobility service as a perk for their employees because they would have access to everything they need. That's a good way to monetize and make sure like the business model is sustainable on the B2C basis. At the moment, obviously it's a bit harder because of the competition, let's face it.
Okay. And the final 30 seconds for Duncan.
So for me, but
gazing.
really super operational when it comes to super apps. Like we push a lot of data, to be able to allow people to hire through. And once these apps have started to become more established and have more modes in them, I want data coming back so that I know where to put my vehicles. I know if the Victoria line is down from such and such to such and such that maybe I need to move some vehicles there and really start having a kind of truly demand managed system in a city. And I think that it's probably there now, but it hasn't been brought together yet. And I think that's going to be a really interesting kind of next phase of mobility.
Yeah. And I'm glad to hear that because this is something we've been pushing for more for local authorities, so really about getting this data reciprocity, the data back from these mass providers back to the public authorities, but of course to the individual operators themselves. It's really important. Okay, I see our Master of Ceremony is looking at me. It's the end of the session, so thank you very much, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our FreeNow panel.